If you've heard of Henri, you probably know him as a software engineer who's quite active on Twitter. You may have met him at one of the many conferences he's spoken at around the world, or you may even know him as the organizer of the Jamstack Toronto Meetup group and the Toronto Web Performance Meetup group. But what you may not know is that Henri has a longer history in the events industry. Prior to his work in tech, Henri worked in music and fashion in tandem. He frequented trade shows, music festivals, and other events that gave him a deep appreciation for the meticulous detail associated with event organization and event production. And when he got into tech, these skills came full circle when he recognized a tremendous opportunity to take the community tech events to the next level. In addition to being an independent consultant in software engineering, he also consults for remote and in-person events. Please enjoy this conversation with Henri Helvetica. The Future of Events podcast is presented by EventLoop. EventLoop is the meetup replacement for industry events in the modern remote era. If you organize, sponsor, speak at, or attend professional industry events, and the remote event platforms of today leave you yearning for more, you may want to take a look at EventLoop. EventLoop reimagines the remote event experience as a hyper-relevant professional social network. Organizers can easily create and promote their events. Companies can organize and manage their DevRels and speakers. Speaker and sponsor info is controlled by the speaker and sponsor and is automatically imported to events, saving them and the organizers from countless hours on email. And lastly, the sponsor experience is completely reimagined to maximize discoverability of sponsor content to also maximize relevance for attendees. EventLoop is in private alpha, and you can request an invite to the platform at eventloop.app and reach out directly to sales@eventloop.app for a personal demo. So once again, to request an invite, head over to eventloop.app and reach out to sales@eventloop.app for a personal demo. Henri, welcome to the Future of Events podcast.
I am super delighted to be here, so thank you so much. This is near and dear to my heart, so I'm happy to have this discussion.
Absolutely. I'm really, really excited to have you as my very first guest on the brand new Future of Events podcast. You have a really, really interesting background and an empathy for event producers and organizers that really few possess. And I wanted you to be my first guest mainly because of your DM to me after I appeared on the Syntax.fm podcast to talk about organizing conferences with Wes Foss and Scott Talinsky. And while that podcast resulted in lots of compliments, you were really the only one who reached out to me directly to express your visceral understanding of what an event organizer actually goes through and what it takes to organize an event. So can you tell me about the first time you attended a tech event and what was your reaction to it?
I remember like it was yesterday, and I think I may have mentioned it to you, but I'm not sure. But regardless, I'm definitely happy to sort of talk about it. And it was someone actually I spoke to this week, in fact, just as a catch up, an instructor that I knew, and he had mentioned once that I should check out meetups, and one particular meetup, this company, this group who had been doing some meetups for a little while. So I decided to go check it out, see what it was all about. I'd never heard of meetups before. And I just remember rolling in and seeing a large audience. And right away, I just thought to myself, like, wow, what is going on here that so many people could be out here, and what is it that's going to be presented? Because I had no idea what the topic was going to be like, who was going to appear. I just knew that I was told I should be there and then to go check it out. And from there on in, having my sort of hat on from previous industries, the wheels start to sort of turn in my head, like, okay, I need to hear what's going to happen here and what opportunities are available. Because, having come from music, if there's one thing that, we love to see, it's crowds, and, a crowd will fuel everything that we want to do with respect to presentations and things like that. So it was a meetup. The meetup group was called DevTO out of Toronto, and just as you sort of complimented me for reaching out in a DM, that very day I reached out to them asking them what they're planning to do with this large audience. Oh, it's even deeper than that. It's I mean, I don't know if I should get into it now or later.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to hear more about that.
Oh, so I'm there. I'm surrounded by a bunch of people I don't know, but it's a large audience, and I'm thinking like, man, this what is happening here? Like, what are people talking about? But the one thing I remember was the fact that they're trying to address the audience with a dinky mic and a guitar speaker, that was on the ground. And I thought to myself, what are they trying to do here? Because no one at the back can hear them because there are so many people just chatting away and they're making all these announcements. And I thought to myself, like, this is all wrong. And so during the meetup, I was actually tweeting at them saying, hey, you know, there's some stuff in the back here that no one's, people aren't paying attention. Like, what are you guys doing? And, eventually by the end of the meetup, I approached them. I'm like, if you guys need help, let me know because this is my bag, you know, and it started from there.
Wow. Wow. I had a similar experience when I first came to San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
The meetups here were just, I mean, there's an amazing meetup every single night. The liberal exchange of knowledge in the software development community is just amazing. And it's one of the main reasons why I really fell in love with tech, to be perfectly honest. I came from the finance world where going to conferences was like being a spy, where everyone's trying to steal each other's stuff and get it. I remember once there was this, we had a booth at this conference. My very first time representing a company at a sponsor booth, and this suit comes up to me, no badge on, and is basically asking these probing questions about proprietary software that we developed that helped us to really encroach on their market. And so he's pretending to be an attendee, and I really had a lot of fun with him because I obviously knew he was a banker. I mean, the look of a banker is pretty unique. It's unmistakable. Yeah, exactly. So when I first came to San Francisco, I was just really enthralled by the meetup scene. It was just fantastic. But one thing I did notice, I didn't catch on the AV issues. Sometimes I did, as quickly as you did, because my events background wasn't that strong at the time. Mm-hmm. But what I did notice, one thing that really stood out to me was that people were handing out business cards. Okay. And I thought, I'm coming to San Francisco, the tech epicenter of the world, and people are handing out physical business cards. It was quite odd. And I remember one of the first app ideas that I had that I started to develop at a hackathon was, this digital business card that you could just share by scanning a QR code and things like that. Did you notice anything else about the meetup groups that really inspired you to want to get more involved, aside from the problems that were associated? Was there anything that inspired you, kind of like I was inspired?
Looking back, I think that as a organizer, whether it be from the music side or, being able to sort of, gather people in the room and whatnot, I've always thought about what are they here for? And I think tech is super broad and, it's fine. And in the beginning, when I was sort of, kind of getting accustomed to the whole, meetup ecosystem, especially on the tech side, it took me a while to kind of get a hold of or get a feel for what people were doing. But again, I was always in there with this hat on, looking around to see what the attendance was like, what was being done for the attendees, what kind of experience it was. But I was always also very interested in the topics. And, the one thing that I noticed was that, it was like an availability of speakers, and they just put them together uh, in a room for the evening, and it's like, hey, speaker X is going to talk about this, speaker Y is going to talk about this. It wasn't always sort of like a cohesive sort of narrative for the night. It was more like these two people were available. So I mean, that I kept that in mind as well. And again, I was always sort of very in tune to what was being done in terms of presentation level, so that when I finally did join the first meetup, which was that original meetup I told you about, one of my mandates was to, you know, be very specific with topics and expand on them. And that may be a little bit of like the academic side of me. My parents were teachers. I really appreciated the idea of having like uh, almost, like a curriculum. It's like this is what's going to be covered, and these topics, work together. So I would certainly help out with programming of the night, and that would mean, hey, guess what? Researching speakers, combing the web, who's saying what, who's discussing what, who's written what, who's talked about what on video, and then starting this sort of process. So I enjoyed that a lot. So I would say the idea of being able to create much better, programming at a night was part of what drove me there as well.
Well, you've certainly done a lot in your career. I mean, you're the organizer of the Jamstack Toronto meetup group, and also the Toronto Web Performance meetup group. And I mean, Meetup as a company, during this crisis, they really haven't offered any solution for taking events online. So I'm curious, what steps did you take to stay engaged with your community? And how have you personally felt about this move to online? And more importantly, to be honest, how have your community members reacted to it?
Great question. And when things had to pivot online, I basically put a stop to everything just to see what people were doing. Pardon me. I really want to have an idea of how people were going to pivot. And again, just to understand what was going to be required. And I'd say, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4. So March happened, janvier, mars, avril, May. So I probably stood around for a solid like 3 or 4 months to get to get a feel for what was being done. Obviously, there's that shock and awe period that everyone is trying to sort of, understand what was taking place. Like many, I'm sure I didn't think this would last. So I was like, whatever, give it a couple months, we should be back to normal. I mean, I was still trying to, sort out my plans for what I thought was going to be an entire month of May in Europe. And I was looking at, case counts in certain countries where I was supposed to be. But obviously that didn't pan out. And I started to really take a look at what people were doing. And I noticed that, people were just jumping online, obviously because they could. And we know that, the opportunity to kind of stream, and, everyone's got a FaceTime camera, and it wasn't like a huge deal to get that done. In fact, I'd even say it was a bit of a low-hanging fruit. It wasn't much of a problem. But that was also the challenge, is that I think people were just simply jumping on, and the ability to get that done is one thing, but the ability to get it done properly is something entirely different. So I looked around and I tried to kind of study from those who had been doing something that I respected and that I thought was pretty awesome. I'll even go out and say that my first online stream meetup was one that I would like to forget. I went back and watched the video, and I was like, oh my God, I don't even want to edit this. What is that saying? Putting lipstick on a pig?
I believe that's how the
no,
saying goes. Yeah.
yeah, there was no amount of lipstick that was going to save this meetup. So I tried to just forget it. But I made some investments, a little bit of hardware, and I'm still kind of like expanding that. But that's what essentially I did. I really, you know, took a seat and really wanted to see, who was doing what. And there's some people out there who I thought were doing great work. And I liked watching their content online, and I always kept that in mind when starting to build out my platform.
Absolutely. And, that's really admirable that you did stay engaged with the community and that you learn new skills. And I think that's that's the boat that we're all in. As a conference speaker, for example, part of your job, if you're like a DevRel or something, is to learn Keynote or some other presentation platform. But nowadays, is the new Keynote Final Cut Pro?
Hey, you're absolutely correct there. It's the new set of skills that you've had to sort of acquire are very important. Being able to record is the easy part. The editing is not. And this takes me back to my times or my days in music. I knew that getting a video done, was so sort of like resource intensive, from like the hardware and software we needed to certainly the people hours that it took to edit stuff. And I always had this appreciation for that for quite a long time. So when it came to getting this started, I was like, oh my God, am I gonna have to edit video now? Yes, I did. And the worst part was that I had a MacBook Air at the time when I first started,
Intel, right?
and Intel MacBook Air. So do the math. If you've ever seen a laptop fly, like that was mine essentially.
Bitcoin mining,
That's
eat your heart out, right?
basically, yeah, exactly. It was like, oh my God, this thing's about to lift off my desk. But no, absolutely. I think it's a necessary skill because it's going to be part of what provides that experience that I think is going to be very important, in the future or at present and moving forward.
Absolutely. And I'd love to talk a little bit more about online events, and we'll get to IRL events as well. But first, I want to mention that the Future of Events podcast is brought to you by Carnelian Lab. As in-person events once again become a reality, we're going to need a health and safety plan in place. And this includes rapid PCR testing and antigen testing. In their blueprint for a safer economy, the California Department of Public Health mandates that for both indoor and outdoor events, guests must show proof of full vaccination or submit to an on-site test. And fortunately, if your event is in the San Francisco Bay Area, Carnelian Lab has you covered. With on-site rapid PCR testing, Carnelian Lab will come to your event and test your attendees right at the door. They'll even assist you with developing a health and safety plan. And these people know what they're doing. They learned how to mitigate and contain outbreaks by protecting our absolutely most vulnerable. Because Carnelian Lab is a division of a mid-sized assisted living home for the elderly. And over the past year, they were extremely successful at preventing and containing outbreaks. So to learn more and get in touch with Carnelian Lab, email them at lab@carnelianhome.com or visit their website at carnelianhome.com/lab. Once again, that's lab@carnelianhome.com and carnelianhome.com/lab. And so I wanted to jump into conferences. And, judging by private conversations that I've had and from the general chatter on Twitter, people are really excited to get back to conferences. But of course, this is fraught with so much uncertainty on various fronts. We have financial risks, health risks, location-specific outbreaks, legal liability, international travel restrictions, and of course the ever-changing government regulations in response to whatever the current status of COVID and its friends, its variants, actually is. So what are your
Distant
thoughts
cousins.
on conferences? I mean, would you even feel safe to go to an event in, say, Las Vegas, maybe this summer?
No. And that's only because as of today, what day is it today?
April 16th.
April 16th. If you had asked me this potentially, I don't know, even like November, December, I'd say, yeah, probably. But these situations are fluid, and what was, probably a decent position 2 weeks ago may just completely U-turn and go south very quickly. And these are things we unfortunately don't have much control over. So it's unfortunate, but it's one of these situations that are literally week to week, or are very sort of, I gotta put it, a look at, the caseload every couple weeks at the very least. And I started to think about this extremely early into the pandemic for a couple reasons. One was that I think I mentioned my parents are retired teachers. My house was like academia, the conversations. And, when the dust sort of settled in March or April last year, when we were like, okay, I think this is with us for a little while, I was looking down the street and I was thinking, well, what does back to school look like in this kind of situation?
Yeah.
Like right away, because again, these were conversations that we had quite often in the house. And, I remember checking with my parents, I was like, what would you have done? And, my parents were like, oh, we just retire, and so I thought of that right away and all the touch points in a day, an academic day. So, you get up, you took a school bus. What did that look like? If you didn't take the school bus, you took public transit. What did that look like? When you got to the door at school, most people remember what that was like, doors opening up, people jammed up. Like, what did that look like? And, I thought about that a lot. But another thing that informed me was music and my past, looking at touring, because you set up your tours depending on, your popularity or whatnot, but you set up your tours easily like 4 or 5 months out. And in a pandemic world, a lots can happen in 4 or 5 months, and these swings can completely destroy a tour. You have these dates set up where you have maybe 4 or 5 cities to stop in over 3 countries. Well, what if, tour stop 3 and 4 are now off because a particular country is having, or a particular area is having an outbreak? These are things that I was thinking of right away. And I knew that this was going to be extremely challenging, And so with that said, if someone were to tell me that, yeah, you're going to be in Las Vegas midsummer, I'd say, I don't know about that. I'd be very curious to see how they'd be able to sort of predict what was going to happen.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on many fronts. I have been pessimistic leading up till now. I remember I spoke at a local, remote, being worldwide now, but small, DevRel community. And I made the prediction that in-person conferences won't be back until 2023. And this was a few months ago. So this was based on my projection that, one, we don't know how the vaccine is going to respond to this, and how it seems to be pretty positive so far. So that's good. But secondly, we don't know how these variants are going to affect it, right? And that also seems to be pretty positive with regard to how the vaccine is affecting that. From the reports that I've read, the vaccine is quite effective at covering all the bases, including all the variants. But of course, commentators curse, don't speak too soon, right? But
exactly.
The idea that we can make this plan for something that is, you know, in low figures, $500,000 to tens of millions, and some events literally in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and we can make this plan years ahead, I mean, can we really make that? Can we really take that risk? You know, if you're consulting for companies or you're an event organizer within your company, you're going to need to bring this plan for an in-person event to your boss for approval and say, okay, we're going to lose this much money at this date. We're going to lose this much money at this date as the, cancellation policy progresses. For those who aren't familiar with running events, you typically don't get back X amount of money if you cancel at a certain date. So, I mean, these are all things we need to take into consideration. My projection for 2013 was that very few people are going to be willing to take that risk at this time because events take a long time to organize. I mean, you look at the Moscone Center. That place was in San Francisco, our big convention center. That place was booking out 2.5 years in 2019, before the crisis. So these things take time to prepare. And I think for a lot of these events, we really need to have a stronger semblance of security before we're ready to go forward with in-person events. Now, all that said, I'm a little more optimistic now, seeing how the vaccine is affecting and how it's really being distributed pretty effectively so far. So I'm a little more optimistic that we'll get to in-person events sooner, particularly with the laxing of regulations and with the and with the built-up angst that attendees and sponsors and speakers have. The only thing that I'm really curious about is specific policies. So companies, whether or not they're willing to send their employees there or even approve them to go there, whether or not they're going to sponsor events. So these are things we really need to figure out. And this is something that I'm hoping to achieve with this podcast, of course. But obviously, we'll need to figure it out together as an industry.
110%. First of all, I think this podcast could not be better timed because we're at this very interesting inflection point right now where there is chatter about in-person events coming back in some form. Some, are predicting, late this year, which I think is, premature, but we can get into that in a hot second. Coupled by what I think is a very interesting, rosy picture on the American side, because as someone who's your northern neighbor, I am privy to American news, and I keep track of it. And it's been wonderful watching what's been taking place. From this doom and gloom that was 2020. And what I thought was a very risky challenge that sort of your new administration had sort of, taken on, which was this 100 million shots in 100 days. And I was like, guys, or folks, this sounds great. I love that pitch, that little marketing angle, but, do not play with lives, but it worked out. So that's been awesome to see. However, I think there's so much more, as you mentioned, that's involved in getting in-person events back. And speaking of persons, they are at the very source of this need, which was cooperation. And I think that we are a little, anxious about getting back. That's without a doubt. Unfortunately, I do not want to see people pull the trigger well, I shouldn't say that, to be a little, ahead of the game. And I have to reference, which I think you saw it, but, a lot of people did, and it was a bit of chatter online about it. And I knew about it because it involved the city of Toronto. But when the Blue Jays were playing the Rangers in that home opener in Texas, it was almost a sellout crowd. That was the narrative. It was so packed. And, that made me believe that, okay, well, we are making some progress, but hopefully it's not 2 steps forward and five steps back, because we are running into an environment where people are starting to just, disregard guidance, and that is my biggest fear. And it's also informing me what potentially could be happening. Now, getting back to what you had mentioned with 2023, I may have said it in our DM, and when I hit you up, we might be brothers from a different mother, because I definitely, was thinking the same way. I did have a bit of a doom and gloom sort of scenario. I was predicting something along the same lines with absolute comfort in 2023. 2022 might be like, I could potentially do this. I'm not sure, but I do believe 2023 is when we'll be able to say, okay, we should be fine. But, that's assuming that we get cooperation, and we have to get it from everyone around and not jump the gun. Again, apologies, not be premature in thinking that this is going to happen inevitably. It will. Whether or not it happens 5 years from now or 10 years from now is up to us as well, right? And so, you mentioned companies, are they going to want to be involved? I'm not sure. You had mentioned liabilities. I think that's a huge conversation, which we could get into at some point as well. I think there is danger in, going out too soon and having something happen on your guard, and who's then responsible, I don't know. It's very touchy, and I think it involves a lot more than people realize, than just opening up doors and making sure that seats are filled and everyone's happy. I also believe that, and this is a bit of an intangible, but I also believe that the in-person event, I shouldn't have to attend this with a hazmat suit. You know what I mean?
That's for sure.
That's the experience. Like, if I have to, carry around like these big plastic gloves and wear a mask, I'd rather stay home at that point. And so until we
what
have
about
that
just
kind
masks?
of certainty,
Would you wear a mask indoors throughout the entire conference? Does that even give you a sense of security, having masks indoors, or is it enough that if we have a health and safety plan,
mm-hmm.
which every event is now required to have, as far as I know,
mm-hmm.
And you're testing everyone,
Mm-hmm.
and or everyone is vaccinated,
Mm-hmm.
it does bring up the question: do we need masks? And I had this discussion with a few people on Twitter, and I posed the question. I said, would you be comfortable if everyone is vaccinated wearing a mask? And someone made a really good suggestion. They said, well, what about on the badge it says things like, comfortable with handshakes, or comfortable without a mask, or please stay 6 feet away, things like that, that can really set expectations that everyone can see from at least 6 feet apart. So I'm curious where you would stand, at least as of today, April 16th, 2021,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of your personal level of comfort with regard to events.
That would be a challenge. Apologies. And I say it simply because as much as we are looking for that sort of respite, like that, being able to just get in there and just see people again, I think that if we have to be literally muzzled to attend, I don't think the experience is what it should be. And I also believe that if you have to start to create these tiers of groups, who's, like the hallway track that we miss so dearly should not be a Venn diagram. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
I agree.
It should not be that complicated.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, no, I can't hang out with you. You know what I mean? And that's where I think, again, the UX that we keep fighting for each and every time translates to the in-person experience. And, if it has to be that complicated, I'm just not sure that we're there yet. And until we can have a conference outdoors, which would ultimately be some kind of possible option potentially. I don't know. Actually, I don't think it is, but I'm just saying that because I think the outdoors experience is the one that's going to survive the most and do best. But until we can have an experience that doesn't require like all these guidelines as to like where you can stand and whatnot, and that makes it super complicated, I don't think we are there yet. And if that's the case, I just rather keep it online.
Yeah, outdoor amphitheaters are definitely going to see their bookings rise in the next few months.
Absolutely, it's happening right now.
Yeah, and I wanted to shift to a bit of nostalgia with a bit of story time in just a moment. But first, I want to mention our next sponsor, Lifted Plate. So as we know that the return to in-person events comes with an increased cost, largely as a result of compliance with and implementation of a health and safety plan. And with these increased costs, it's really difficult to even break even when a gallon of coffee is costing you $190. Fortunately, Lifted Plate has your solution. They are experienced event professionals and caterers based in the San Francisco Bay Area, and they pride themselves on one thing: providing you with professionally serviced, delicious food at rates you won't find anywhere else. And I can tell you from personal experience that Lifted Plate has catered some of my previous events that I've organized, and the only thing that made me happier than the taste of the food was their professional service and the price. And I'm not just saying that because I'm actually a partner at Lifted Plate. Their food really does blow me away every single time. So if you're running an event in the San Francisco Bay Area and you're looking for top-notch food from one of the best caterers in the area at prices that absolutely will not break the bank, reach out to Lifted Plate at hello@liftedplate.com or learn more on their website at liftedplate.com. Once again, that's hello@liftedplate.com, and their website is liftedplate.com. Okay, so I want to get to this new segment. Well, since this is the first episode, it is just a segment. It's not new. Well, it is new. I guess it's new on top of new. A new segment called Storytime, where we, tell stories about our experiences, at conferences that really just bring a smile to all our faces. And this was somewhat inspired by a tweet that Zach Leatherman sent a few weeks ago, or actually just last week. Kind of went semi-viral among us web devs, where he asked, share an inspiring in-person conference experience, and Ryan Florence says, "Why are you torturing us?" So Henri and I are discussing, a return to this, but Henri, I wanted to, I wanted to bring this back to you and see if you have, a really good memory from an in-person conference, either that you organized, were part of in the organization and production, or as an attendee or speaker.
Absolutely. I have to say that the very last JSConf EU that happened in 2019, I think it was the last of I think it was like the 10th one, and they've gone on hiatus. Pardon me. They've gone on hiatus for now, but I absolutely loved it. And the short answer why was because I felt like it felt like a music festival with tech content. And this is something that I'd been, in my head, believing that could happen. And it was a huge stage. I can't remember how wide it was, but it was just like feet upon feet upon feet. It was like, this is amazing. You could probably run across the stage and be winded, right? and they had, I remember this big sort of like hanging set of monitors that were in the shape of an X. I'm assuming 10, and it was motorized, so it was moving,
Mm.
um, and even outside of the stage area, the booths had this kind of merch tent feel. Everyone had the same kind of booth, same design, and it,
Hmm.
it felt like a merch tent. And I remember walking around thinking like, this is awesome. This is the experience I think is that could be had in a tech event. And granted, you know, they opened up the purses. I'm sure it costs a lot to produce, but coming from music, we have a tendency to be able to sort of make some things happen with little resources. But the idea that they sort of they're able to create this kind of like large event and have that kind of feel to it, like great AV, I think it was fantastic. And it's a memory that's sort of like burnt on my mind for sure. How about yourself?
I mean, there are so many amazing memories. I think one of the memories that really sticks out to me is the very first talk of I guess it wasn't the first talk. It was the first talk of the advanced conference of the first Reactathon conference.
Mm-hmm.
Very brief background on Reactathon. It started as just a week of events leading up to Facebook's ReactConf in Santa Clara, because that conference was impossible to get tickets to. And so, as the organizer of the Real World React meetup group, we organized, I organized a week of events leading up to the conference. And that included a very large meetup at Pinterest HQ, fantastic HQ, by the way. We had over 350 people show up, right?
Wow.
And this is a meetup. This is San Francisco meetup style, folks. And the next year we were planning on, because of the demand, organizing a fundamentals conference, a one-day conference to welcome folks from Angular or just out of boot camp to the React community and basically curate a whole day of talks, introducing them to the ecosystem. You're not going to be an expert, but of course it's going to introduce you to the ecosystem. But then in December, Facebook announces, we're not going to organize ReactConf in Q1 this year as usual. And it took me about 10 seconds to say, all right, I'm going to do an advanced conference. So it became a dual conference. And I just remember that, the fundamentals conference was great. It was smaller, but it was great. But the advanced conference was in a different location, same venue, but different location, much greater attendance, over 350 people. For my first conference, that was pretty good. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have like a keynote speaker, someone to like welcome everyone, but I had David Wells give the first talk. And I said, you're kind of the keynote speaker, so just, have a little bit of hurrah, have a little bit of flair. And he mentioned that I told him that at the beginning of his talk. And the beginning of his talk was just hilarious. If you want to go look it up, David Wells, Reactathon 2018. And he starts by saying, 70 million years ago, dinosaurs ruled the earth. And a meteor came down and it created a lot of silicon. And he starts to tell this whole story, this hilarious story, got everyone laughing, about the origins of Silicon Valley in this kind of cartoonish manner. And it was just so funny. And David is such an amazing speaker and really funny himself. So that is one of the memories that really sticks out in my mind as just so endearing and just so unexpected. I didn't expect that at all, of course. Yeah.
You mentioned something that I loved as well, and the fact that sometimes you have a particular conference that has such significance or that's so important that you have this sort of ecosystem of other little meetups that are scheduled around it. So you end up having, if you're coming in from out of town or whatnot, or even if you're in town, you have like a week of scheduled events, in varying, importance and technologies and obviously guests that really make a particular, say, event like so much bigger and better, because that whole time you're there just breaking bread from people from all around the world, and that experience to me is fantastic. It's like a series of events that take place leading up to potentially X. And that's what happened in Germany. I didn't attend all of them, but they had a series of meetups that were all sort of scheduled around JSConf EU 10. And I thought, like, man, as someone who's either lives here or decides to take that entire week and stick around, this is amazing. And that to me is an experience that you can never forget. And hopefully it's an experience that people try to create with in person, or tried to create with in person as much as possible. Now, like for example, I'd fly into a city for a conference, and I'd look around, to see what else is going on. Is there a meetup the day before? Is there a meetup after? Like, can I attend? I want to see the community. I want to meet people there. And to me, that's part of the experience. So that's where I felt like, conference organizers and little meetups should have, closer ties and say, hey, let's build something for the entire week that could be like super awesome, but I also want to get to something else that you mentioned, with reference to San Francisco, but even I think one of the sponsors, I thought of as well, what's it going to be like with potentially rapid testing on site? And as an organizer, that obviously crossed my mind for a number of reasons. It could be, tech related, it could be something else, even like, like a private event. What does that look like? What does it look like having to, because we know the check-in process already at a tech event, it's like mostly like, hey, what's your name? Okay, here's your badge, go over here, get your bag, whatever. What is it like to add 10 to 15 minutes to that process?
10 to 15, that's very optimistic, Henri.
Well, but you know what I mean? Like, that's what I'm saying now. Like, let's think about that. Like, what do you think?
So I don't know. Everything that I could tell you right now would be pure speculation, and I'm hoping over the coming weeks, as I have more conversations with experts who've been thinking about this a lot longer. I'm the co-founder of a remote event startup, so my head has been in that space for so long. But it's been over a year, and I really want to get back to in-person events, despite being the co-founder of a remote events startup. So I think there's a lot of ways you can go about it. I think you're gonna want to test as many people the day before as possible to reduce that friction, right? I believe the majority of, depending on where you are, of course, but the majority of governments will regulate, you need to be tested within 24 hours. So if you can get tested the day before, perfect. Now, if it's a longer event, what's that incubation period between infection and when you are actually contagious? You may need to get tested again, or we may need to restrict the length of the event itself. But I think that you definitely need to be, number one, checking that people are vaccinated, and number two, authenticating that. We don't really have a blockchain to validate the authenticity of these vaccination cards. So not to say that someone is going to be, hey, I'm infected, I'm going to go here and get everyone infected. That's a very low likelihood, especially at professional industry events. But if you have someone who, say, doesn't believe in them, or really doesn't believe in the efficacy of them, or is just scared to take the vaccine, and they go to the event and they somehow forge this, and this is, of course, again, an outlier, not to scare people, this is a very outlier, but we have to accommodate for these circumstances. We need a way to authenticate these cards. Is there a way to, is this already in place? Is there a way to authenticate this? I honestly don't know. That's something I should definitely look up. But we need to authenticate that. And then, if someone tests positive, or even if they have had the vaccine, you should probably be taking the laser temperatures. Because if you get the vaccine, you can still get the virus, right? The vaccine is going to help you fight off the virus, but you can still become infected. Whether or not you can then spread that to others, I think the general consensus is that that's unlikely. I'm not going to really speculate there, but I think you still want to, play to the lowest common denominator and really just be as safe as possible. But on that same token, Henri, and this is something, I don't know if we'll have too much time to explore this, but I wanted to get your hot take on this, is how much risk are we as individuals willing to accept? Granted, most of us will work for companies, and when we're going to events, we're representing those companies and are subject to the policies of those companies. But as individuals, are we now comfortable with going to these events knowing that, hey, potentially we could get sick? Are we willing to risk that? I mean, we have, with all the other viruses that were out there up until now, this one is a little bit more deadly, and obviously it transmits a lot easier. But is that something that we are willing to take as individuals and then potentially as a society? Like, what is your personal level of comfort with that?
Well, I think unfortunately it's a one long equation with many variables. For one, I think people will take risks simply because, for the most part, they've not seen the the sort of like cataclysmic outcomes. So, and I say this because for the most part, this is a respiratory illness, and it's not like it's not a flesh-eating disease where people are seen sort of like falling apart. You know what I mean? There isn't like a graphic element to someone getting sick in this case. So I think there's been this element of risk-taking that has been present, and we've seen people sort of like debate this. It's like, oh, it doesn't exist. I've not seen anyone, yada, yada, yada. So, I've joked around, and I shouldn't, but, I've always said if people who had this virus turned blue, we'd,
Yeah.
we'd understand a bit more.
Yeah.
So that's A. B, I just think that we are like, it's going to be a challenging moment. I mean, this risk taking is going to involve a lot more than just the individual going. I think, someone getting sick at an event will not only fall on that person, but, some organizers may have some involvement here. And I'm not sure how many want that to take place. Are you as an organizer comfortable with having the welfare of 300 people on your plate? You had mentioned the temperature readings. I think that's baked in now. I don't think I don't think you're doing anything public without that happening.
Yeah.
Indoors anyways.
Yeah.
And so, if I walk in somewhere, someone's not checking my temperature, I might just U-turn.
Well, perhaps even outdoors. I mean, if you're going for a run with maybe a couple of people, maybe not. But if you're going to an event where hundreds or potentially thousands of people, even if you're outdoors, you're probably going to want to check the temperature.
No, I think there's a new set of protocols that have to be in place. And you had mentioned that, in San Francisco, there might be like some, new regulations and whatnot. I'm very curious to see how that goes, because we've already heard, like you discussed the idea of like these cards coming in. I think, the card is really the quote unquote vaccine passport that everyone's talking about, right? And what does that look like? How do you implement it? Can you ask for it? Because you're going to have domestic challenges there. You're going to have intra-state challenges. You're going to have inter-state challenges, because we know rules differ from state to state. And, even down to municipal, because we've seen, states fight with, smaller municipalities about particular guidance, and they go back and forth, this is where I think it gets a lot more complicated than people realize to return to in-person events. And I'd mentioned, on a kind of lower scale, what happens at a meetup now. Because the meetup is really like a very a small scaled conference, if you want to call it that. But there's usually not much of a charge and whatnot. And like you said, I think you said Pinterest had an amazing AV spot. Is that it?
Yeah, they had a whole AV setup and they did all the recording for me. I didn't have to do anything.
Yeah.
Those are the best meetups.
Exactly. That's amazing. Like, who doesn't want an amazing space with a great AV sound and beautiful screen and whatnot? But these are private spaces. Now, in 2021, 2022, and beyond now, are they making the accommodations for you to come in to have a meetup? I'm not sure. Because, like I said, and as you know, it's going to take a lot more than just what we know and see. There's a lot of paperwork that's going to be involved now, and I'm very curious as to how they're going to move forward with that. I'll give you a quick example. I don't want to take up too much time because I'm sure we could talk about this forever. But I was speaking with someone in Australia last week. In fact, I'm going to retract that this week. And we were talking about this because, as you may or may not know, Australia is in a completely different sort of period right now. They've comfortably returned to in-person to an extent. I know someone who I'm speaking to on Monday, in fact, 2 days from today, 3 days, pardon me, who just gave her first in-person meetup talk in X amount of months. And but in contrast, I spoke to someone this week who told me that a large company that I won't name, but a large company denied someone the request for a meetup in their space, specifically because of the sort of like unclear situation with regards to liability. And I think that's going to remain as a big question mark going forward. And again, simply because, this may require this kind of expense just to have a meetup. And I'm not sure people are going to be enthralled in getting that done.
Yeah, I think you and I are definitely in agreement there. I mean, if you're a venue and your livelihood depends on getting events there, you're going to do everything you can to make that safe, and you're gonna hire extra staff if you need to, maybe raise your prices a little bit, or maybe lower your prices to attract more people. Who knows? We'll see where this goes. But you're specializing in that, and that's what you specialize in. Pinterest specializes in software pins of pictures. They don't specialize in the events, and so they don't have this clear and present danger of bankruptcy if they don't host events at their office. So yeah, it's unlikely that that anyone is going to be hosting meetups at their office in the near future. Now, it'll be interesting to see if we have, like we had this partnership with Meetup and WeWork, or I think WeWork actually bought Meetup and then Meetup got sold again. I'm not too clear on it, but the idea there was that WeWork was going to help them host events. So if we have some sort of partnership like that, or we see some sort of, co-working space emerge as the leader for in-person events, at least maybe in the at least maybe in the tech scene, or at least maybe in specific cities, perhaps that is a future. But yeah, it'll definitely be curious to see where that goes for sure.
Oh, certainly. By the way, I just chatted you a link. I don't know if you wanted to post it.
Let me
take a look at it,
up,
because that is dated from 2 days ago, and this is Australia and an in-person meetup. They're in a space closed. There aren't too many there, probably for obvious reasons. Okay. Shout outs to Amy. But yeah, I mean, I'm going to have this discussion with her.
Sorry, say that again. This was when?
This was 3 days ago in Australia.
Interesting. It almost looks, it does look normal.
Exactly. And in fact, um, earlier this year, it may have been, if not late last year, I'd seen something along the same lines, and it was in Perth. And I had to just do a double take and look at the date. I'm like, tell me this is an old tweet that got bumped or something.
Yeah.
And it wasn't. And when I, quizzed someone about this, I'm like, what is going on here? And a few people from Perth got back to me. They're like, hey, it's been pretty flat here for a while. We've not had the situations that, people have been seeing in Europe and North America. So, this has been, in line with what would be normally possible with very low instances of the virus. And again, I was kind of like, hey, go for it if you can. But it was a little surprising. But it goes back to what you're saying in terms of like it all depends on the community, where they're at in terms of cases, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know. It was quite it was a pleasant sight, but it was just again, I had to clutch my pearls.
Yeah. Well, it's good to see that there is someone in some place out there that shows an example for what, life could be post pandemic. Whether that means like, I don't know what their regulations are there, but from what you told me, it sounds like the whole situation has just improved vastly, which makes it safe to do. Of course, then we have warnings from officials saying, don't let your guard down because that's what's going to cause the pandemic to surge again.
Absolutely.
So yeah, we just need to be careful and measured about this. But I think, at the end of the day, it comes down to mental health too. I don't know about you, but I did not do too well this past year. Building a startup really kept me busy, but my wife works in assisted living, taking care of the most vulnerable, the elderly. So I basically had to quarantine for a year. Thank God I had I'm a road bikie, so that kept me sane. little
Very
solo
important.
adventures on the road. But I think everyone is at that state where we're social beings. We just need to meet. We just need to come together, and we need to find a way forward. That's what I'm really hoping to learn through discussions like this with yourself, other industry experts. So I think that's actually a good place to end this. I didn't have an ending in my notes, but Henri, I really appreciate you being the very first guest on this. I hope when I hit stop that everything saves and nothing breaks. This is my first time doing this, so we'll see. If it does break, then you may be just listening to the audio version of this with our backup recordings.
Absolutely.
Was there anything else you wanted to say before we let you go?
It was a pleasure to have this conversation. I think it's one that, again, I was super delighted to have heard you on the podcast. And I still remember, being on this walk and thinking like, oh my God, someone gets it, and I wanted to make it a priority when I got back in to message you. But I think it's an extremely important conversation. There's so many elements to this, from a commercial element to, like you said, mental health, which is super important. And, it's been a year and change. We're still not out the woods yet, so we have to sort of like hold on. But it's good to have this conversation with other professionals and get feedback, get some ideas. We may be sort of like tunnel vision into thinking like 2023, but someone may have something else to provide in a greater conversation. So I'm very excited to have, more of these, because I think it's very important, like you said, you want those memories back, from Reactathon, having a fantastic keynote that makes you laugh.
Yeah.
And there's everyone loves to laugh, like, let's go. We want to laugh together and just have these memories and share them again. So thanks for having me, man. Thanks for thinking of me for the very first one. And I hope people vibe with it.
Henri, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for chatting with me on the very first episode of the Future of Events podcast. I hope you have a great day.
Thank you. You too. And have a great weekend.
You too. All right. And that concludes the first episode of the Future of Events podcast. If you enjoyed that, please give it a like, a thumbs up, all that good stuff. Subscribe, do all the things that YouTubers always tell you to do. And leave a comment. When do you think that events will come back, and do you have any specific concerns? If you'd like us to cover something in the future episode, feel free to leave that in the comments, or you can email me directly at ben@eventloop.app.